All right, let's finish here, as we had some problems finishing last time. So here was the Kellogg-Briand Pact. We said economic recovery in those hopeful years was the Dawes Plan, and then the two political pacts that really gave people at least a sense of peace, even if it didn't really do a ton. So the Kellogg-Briand Pact went a little bit further than that Locarno Treaty that recognized the boundaries or the borders, but it condemned war as an instrument of national policy. And people agreed to settle disputes peacefully. However, as I said at the end of the last lecture, there was no way to enforce it. So if someone like, Hitler decided that they didn't want to settle disputes peacefully, then what? So 63 nations signed it kind of as a good feeling, and a good foot forward, but there wasn't a lot of meat behind it, which was a problem. Then 1929, the Great Depression shatters all optimism. And yes, the Great Depression is the collapse of the American U.S. economy, but U.S. economy is what European recovery during those hopeful years was built on. So the fact that there is, I wonder if it's, I just need to make sure that we're recording. Oh, but we are. Sorry, my computer went funny. Who's heard that before? All right, so there it was. Europe's prosperity had been built on U.S. bank loans to Germany and that Dawes Plan, and so when the U.S. economy collapsed, the European economy collapsed too. You had, by 1932, 1 in 4 British were unemployed, 40% of Germany was unemployed. In the U.S., the industrial production dropped by 50%. You know from U.S. history all the problems with the Great Depression. So it wasn't just the U.S. Yes, it was centered in the U.S., but it collapsed Europe as well. So for a second time in 10 years, especially the Germans, were hit hard by the fact that they had thought they'd recovered and they lost everything again. And so it really gives people psychologically, as I said before, the mindset to follow a crazy radical like Hitler when he provides what they hadn't had in the last 10 years. Okay, so if we shift gears now towards Western democracy, we know we're going to cover Great Britain and France really pretty quickly, and that's about it. So the Western democracy piece at the beginning of chapter 26 just takes a look at what happens in Britain and what happens in France. David Lloyd George and his government really proved unable to capitalize and improve on the situation in Great Britain post-war. All right, so your parties at this point are the Labour Party, which is like your socialist party, your Conservative Party, which is a much more modern day 20th century conservative, and then your Liberal Party. Okay, so on the spectrum, I don't probably have it correctly there. It goes Labor, then Liberal, then Conservative, more towards the right. So 1923, a guy named Ramsay MacDonald is the first prime minister, and he only lasts 10 months. He tries to deal with the economic downturn, and certainly he can't. So the next guy then is Stanley Baldwin, and he's a conservative. And this conservative prime minister really tries to lay the groundwork for economic recovery. He will guide the prosperity of 1925 to 1929. Unemployment will still be high. The coal miners will go on strike. There's coal surpluses, so the coal miners aren't making any money. So there are some definite issues, but 1925 to 1929 were the hopeful years, and the Conservative Party will lead Britain through those hopeful years. 1929, we get the Labour Party. The Labour Party will come back to power. So what you really need to remember is we go from Labour Party to Conservative Party, back to Labour Party. And your Labour Party will balance the budget, try to institute some protective tariffs and drop unemployment, which will be good, and then the Great Depression will hit, all right? They will ignore, the Labour Party will ignore that Keynesian economic theory of deficit spending, and they will balance the budget, but it's all for naught there in 1929 when the Great Depression hits. Okay, so that's really it. That's it. Your book does a quick snippet on Great Britain. It's trouble post-war, trying to rebuild. They want to remember, forgive Germany, and Germany, but the collapse of the German economy really hurts everyone. All right, so they go Labor, Conservative, back to Labor, and Great Depression. If we look at France, France is a little bit different. 1919, they have the conservative guy Poincaré, who creates this national bloc government. He's the one who really takes that really hard line policy towards the Germans, wants the Germans to pay, threatens the occupation of the Ruhr, and then actually occupies when Germany refuses to pay. It leads, because it's disastrous, costs France more money than they get out of it. It leads to an increase of taxes, and he's got to go. So the failure of the Ruhr really ends Poincaré's conservative national bloc government. So then we go all the way to the left, and it's different parties. It's different parties that combine together, and they call themselves the cartel of the left. Well, and that doesn't work either. So they're radical and socialists. They're more Marxist than they are anything else. They're those socialists, and they don't do anything because they're just not the same. The differences in the way that they want to recover the government brings an end to them. So we go conservative all the way over to the left. And then, in true French fashion, Poincaré returns. And he actually does stabilize the government. There's no occupation of the Ruhr this time. He kind of benefits from the Dawes Plan and the economic recovery of Europe. And then the Great Depression brings an end to him as well. If you talk about Scandinavia, not their cooperation. Their government takes a much more socialist approach, as they still have today. They increase social services, old age pensions, housing. And all of those things in Scandinavia. So that certainly Scandinavia will prosper, which is just... All right, last government you need in France is the Popular Front government. So after all the Great Depression, and France comes through, maybe more unscathed than the Germans and the British because they had less to lose, but you get your Popular Front government with Blum. And they're socialist as well. And so you'll get France's version of the New Deal. And the 4 things you need to remember is they give the unions the right to collectively bargain. They institute a 40-hour work week, 2 weeks paid vacation, and a minimum wage in France. So worker-wise, they do a really good job. The problem is that the government gives up so much and goes into so much debt that they're really unprepared to deal with the rise of Hitler here in World War II. They don't economically and industrially recover as much as they need to because they're really focused on giving the workers rights. So they spend themselves once again into an enormous debt, and then they're unable and unprepared to deal with Hitler. So that's where you're going to really end for France and Great Britain and Scandinavia. Tomorrow we will do Mussolini, and so make sure you have your notes. You can read. I'll post all the notes online with this on this page, and then on Monday when I get back we'll do Hitler, and Tuesday we'll do Stalin. So make sure you do some reading. Don't forget your World War II projects are due next week, Thursday and Friday. Have a good weekend.